You're listening to The Disconnect, a podcast about anxiety and how it disconnects you from your normal self. We're here to share our journey and help you through yours to show you you're not alone. And now, your hosts, Austin Grant and Lindsey Jones. Welcome to episode 8 of The Disconnect. For those of you who have been following along with us, welcome back. If you're just tuning in for the first time, we're so glad that you're listening. Our most recent episode, we did a recap of 2019 and how that ended, and we talked about some goals for 2020 with our podcast as well as some personal goals. And today we wanted to talk about something that everybody can relate to, and that's anxiety over job interviews. Figured it's very relevant. New year, everybody's like, oh, I want a new job, and going forward, applying for things, and I mean, it's never a bad thing to, no matter how long you've been in your position, whether you're thinking about leaving, whether you're perfectly content with your job, it's never a bad thing to get yourself out there, get some interview experience, see that, it's always nice knowing that if you had to, that you could get a job, and it's kind of reassuring, especially if you've been in a position for very long. And so today we found some really interesting articles on some ways to cope, and we just talk about our personal experience with interviews and how we've dealt with them, just because, it's common for people to get nervous or anxious. Like, that's just the butterflies in your stomach, sensing the pressure or whatever it may be from the interview. So that's not like you don't have clinical anxiety if you get nervous before an interview. But in our experience, having the clinical anxiety side to it and then just adding on top of that the interview, I remember back this summer, I actually thought, I was like, I wonder how I'd be in an interview right now, and I just instant panic attack. I was like, I don't want to think about that right now, so let's not. And then I didn't. So
yeah, I think for me, I actually had an interview today, so that was fun. Super quick little phone interview for a position that I applied for. And it's interesting because I normally get really, really nervous around interviews and really anxious. Mostly because, what if I screw up? What if they don't like me? What if I don't get the job? And I've had to talk myself off of that cliff so many times. But today it went really well, and I found some calming techniques before my interview really helped, and I just kind of found peace in the fact that if I don't get the job, then no harm, no foul. It's not like I'm any worse off than I was before, mostly because, I'd be leaving my current job, so it does help that I do have a current position that I would be leaving. But yeah, I think it went well, and my anxiety around it didn't impact me like it normally would, and I was surprised at myself by that. And I really do think that the meditative stuff that I did prior to that helped.
I think the circumstance would be different if you just straight quit your job and then, if I don't get this, I don't have a job.
Oh, absolutely. I know that when my brother was in between jobs looking for a new position, he was so anxious all the time about whether he was going to hear back, when he was going to have to interview, where, what time the interviews were, how he was going to get there and everything. And I know that was really stressful for him, but it was because he didn't already have a job. So there is a difference between not having a job already and needing to find a job versus having one that you just want to maybe leave, or you want to explore new opportunities and stuff like that. So I think that's an important distinction to make with yourself, in that anxiety is going to be there no matter what. And if you are looking for a job when you don't have one, you should probably consider working on metering your anxiety a little bit more so it doesn't inhibit your chances of getting a job.
Well, and I think it's common too with it's not bad to be nervous in an interview. They can tell
Oh,
like
yeah,
it's
absolutely.
nerves. Like if you're skittish and like shaking and stuff, like that's okay. They're not going to be like, yeah, this person got nervous. They have feelings. We're not going to hire them. Like if that's the case, then you probably shouldn't have worked there in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but when I had an interview recently this past week, yeah, I mean, I was pretty nervous going in. Like I was trying to prep myself, talk myself through it. Like, I mean, just going from 6 months ago, just thinking like stressing out about a meeting at work that was an hour long, and I'm like, okay, how am I gonna sit there for an entire hour? Like, and that was the hardest thing. But like for this interview, I knew there was two parts. It was an hour and 45 minutes apiece, a little break in between. Didn't even phase me. And so like, I mean, the thoughts started to come kind of like they did in the summer, but kind of just held them captive a bit and not let them control my mind or cause me to obsess over it and stress about it and start to panic. And I mean, honestly, this was like one of the first interviews that I actually spent a lot of time preparing and making sure I was ready, doing some research and things. Because in previous, I've just, it hasn't been like I've done a little bit of research here and there for some other interviews and stuff, but it was never to this degree, simply because it was a new company, outside of something I've done and out of my comfort zone ultimately, and so I had to do a little bit more research, and so I mean I felt pretty good about it. Once they start asking questions and they kind of calm you down a little bit, like I think it helps me a ton, because then I'm like, okay, well, these things that I wanted to make sure I said it perfectly or it came across right, and all this like anticipatory talk about, oh, I don't know if they're going to understand what I'm getting at or if my point's going to be made, like all that was set aside, and I knew that I was right there in that moment for the interview. And so at that point, I mean, I just kind of went with it, and kind of just answered the questions and made sure to be thorough with it, but also getting right to the point. And it was really just fascinating how I calmed myself down, and by the end of it, I was calm and I felt pretty confident about my answers and everything. And then the post-interview anxiety came in. I'm like, well, what if I missed it? What if I didn't say this? What if? And they're like, now, like, I'm waiting to hear back, and it's like, holy crap, like, I haven't heard back yet. It's been 48 hours. They hate me, and they're not going to choose me. like, just relax. And, like, that whole, like, your brother, like you said he experienced, like, I totally get that, because, if I didn't have a job right now, I'd be freaking out. I'd be like, Lindsay, oh, my gosh. And you're like, listen, it's been 2 hours. Relax. Like, that would totally be me.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I felt really good about it, and so I'm excited to kind of pursue it a little bit. And like you said, I mean, even if it doesn't go well and I don't get this position, the great thing about it is it's a learning experience that I can use for future interviews or to better set myself up for the future.
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
any role I choose to take.
It's interesting that you say that, because I was talking to one of my friends about it, and he was saying that, like, it's good practice. And he was asking me, like, when was the last time that you actually did an interview? Because I've worked in my position for so long now, and the last time I did it was 8 years ago, and that was so long ago that I don't know how to interview anymore. I did it once and I was fine. I did it a second time and I was, okay. But like, I don't know what it's like to interview after having all of these experiences that I've had in the last however many years. And so I was like, wow, I really do need the practice. So that's part of the other reason why I decided to start applying for new positions. And even if I don't get the job, like, I like the job that I have now. I'm not in any hurry to leave, so there's not really that pressure to put on myself to have to go get a new job. But being able to show up to an interview and do really well just reaffirms the fact that, like, if you did need to get a job, or you do have to pursue an opportunity like that, that you'd be prepared for it at the very least. And so I just look at it as practice, and that's how I went into it today. It's just practice, right? It was just a phone interview. It's just practice for a phone interview. I talk on the phone all the time, right? I know how to talk on the phone. I could nail a phone interview easy, no problem. So it wasn't so much that I was nervous about the interview itself. I think it's just residual anxiety at this point for me with interviews and stuff like that, that like I feel as though I'm supposed to be anxious about it. It's something that we don't do all the time, and it feels like there's a lot of pressure when there shouldn't be. So I think that's probably why I was feeling anxious, is I just had this residual, like, oh, I have to be anxious about it because it's a phone interview, or I have to be anxious about it because, like, oh, I want this job or whatever. But at the end of the day, I'm not any worse off than I was before.
Yeah, and I mean, I like that idea of kind of going in with that mindset, like you said. Like, we're both in the positions right now where, you know, it's a steady job. It's something that we've done and we enjoy, and I think that's the best time to get that practice in, to when it's not, I need this job or I'm not going to be able to eat. Because then that's a whole other, if you haven't taken the time to practice, if you haven't taken the time to kind of get the kinks out, for lack of better terms, or even just practice writing your resume or your cover letter and getting those things situated, it's going to get to the point, like, if that happened, you're going to panic, and you're going to, you know, that's going to put you in a worse spot than, you know, if you regularly interviewed every couple months or, you know, every year or so, just to kind of stay fresh on how it is. You know, you don't want to stay, like, even if you do like your job and everything, I think it's important not to kind of stay stagnant as a...
Become complacent, kind of.
You know, stagnant in your current role, or like, it's good to kind of get out there and, like, know, you know, tell yourself that you can do it. You know, it's like a confidence booster in that piece, knowing, like, yeah, I've been in my position for however long, but I know, like, you know, if I wanted to, I could get something better or move up or whatever.
Yeah, and then you're always ready. I think another thing is, you mentioned the resume piece, and I realized that I hadn't updated my resume in forever. So it was really hard to go back through years and years of accomplishments and work that I'd done and try to remember everything. I think maybe a good rule of thumb, and something I think I might try to start doing, is to update my resume every 6 months, just because I can, right? Just keep a running track of everything that I'm doing for the past 6 months. And really working on making sure that it's as up to date as I can possibly get it. And you can always go back and rewrite things and take things off. And I personally have a master resume and cover letter. So I have a resume that has everything that I've ever done on it. I have a cover letter that is as bare bones as I can make it, to where I can, you know, move things around and slap some other words in here and there and change some things around and have a fairly decent cover letter. But it's an idea. It's kind of like a rough sketch of a cover letter that I have. And I just started to keep up with editing my resume every 6 months, to make sure that I have things on there. 'Cause thinking back to what you did 2 years ago, when you're trying to apply for a job that closes in 2 days, that's a lot of stress, and you're not going to be able to remember everything that you did. And then later on down the line, after you've applied already, that's when you start remembering all these things, because you're not thinking about it constantly. You're not trying to force yourself to remember. And then you think, like, oh man, I should have added this other thing to my resume, or oh man, there was this really cool research opportunity that I had, or this really cool volunteer opportunity that I had that I didn't get to put on there, that would be super relevant to the job that I'm applying for. And just keeping things up to date is never a bad idea. Because what happens if you, suddenly lose your job? At any point, anybody could lose their job, right? Not to cause anxiety about that, but it's a thing that could happen, right? And you have to be prepared for that. And so I think holding yourself accountable to updating a resume and making sure that, your interview skills are polished never hurts anybody to have those skills up to date.
Well, it's interesting that you say that too about the not wanting to forget anything, or there was that project, or I wish I would have put that on my resume. I didn't think about it till now, and it's the day before the interview. Something my mentor told me as he was helping me prep for this interview is, nobody knows your story as good as you do. So that research project that you forgot to put, and that, or like you're going through answering these questions in an interview, and you're thinking like, oh man, I'm way off track. I don't know how I'm ever gonna get back on this, get back to the question or whatever. They have no idea that you're going off track, and so kind of use that to your advantage almost. And tell the story as you want to be honest, and you want to be upfront and professional and everything, but if you start outwardly expressing or actually saying, oh, I forgot to mention, until that happens,
they don't know.
Nobody's gonna know that you forgot to mention something you did or anything like that. And so kind of just it's good to prep, it's good to do all that you can to make sure you're ready for the interview, but at the same time, I think it's possible to over prepare, and you don't want to get to that point to where you're over prepared and then it's just you're a robot and they don't get to see your true self because you panicked too much and you over anticipated the questions to the point where you couldn't even answer the simple questions in a manner that expresses your true self. And I think that says it all. If you have no interview skills at all, or if you're the best interviewer out there and you have a lot of experience, the thing that I think to me that I'm starting to learn, people care more about your personality, who you are as a person, your character, your values, and they can see that. If they can see that in your interview, I think it increases your chances of getting hired, because whether the position requires a lot of skills or not, great. You can teach skills. You can't teach someone how to be a human or how to be a, good citizen. I think it's to that point where just letting a little bit of yourself come out, which is kind of what he told me. Regardless of what happens, you can prepare your answers, have it down to a script if you want, but at the end of the day, just be yourself. And that to me, I'm not the type of person when I'm talking to you, having a conversation, it's not scripted. I'm not having a word for word verbatim conversation with you right now. And so that wouldn't be natural to me, and you could tell that I was trying to be something I wasn't. And so that made a lot of sense to me when he was helping me prepare, and I was conscious of that in the interview. Regardless of what happens, I'm myself, and it's fascinating to think about now, just because it's there's all this pressure that you put on yourself, or like you said, you have to be anxious about this because it's what everybody says it's stressful, and you don't know if you're qualified and this, that, and the other. But at the end of the day, they're asking you questions, you're answering questions. Majority of it's about yourself, and nobody knows yourself better than you.
Well, at least in the university setting, in a university, at least at the university that we work for, they do a matrix, and I know that's pretty common among different institutions, and just different places to work in general. So they take your application and they score it on a certain scale, and you get certain points based upon certain things that are on your resume, or you lose points based upon things that aren't there. And you can have too full of a resume, so you always have to pick and choose what you want to add, and you should always add relevant information. But to me, the fact that I got an interview is enough to tell me that I'm qualified. right? The fact that they're willing to bring me in and take the time out of their day to actually sit down and talk to me, after they've already looked at my resume, after they've already read my cover letter and done all that stuff, that I'm already qualified for the position, right? All of my skills, I've already qualified for the position, right? And so the interview to me is just like you were saying, like it's a personality check. Like, are you going to be a good fit for the position? If you don't, like, if you're in a customer service position and you don't have like the conversation skills to talk to an ant, then you're probably not going to be a good fit for like a front facing customer service role. And that's fine, right? You have to kind of know your strengths and your weaknesses and be able to say like, yeah, this job is something that I could be good at, or this job is something that I'd like to learn. And they'll be able to sense that in your interview. Like a good interview committee will be able to figure out like, yeah, this person's going to be a really good fit for the position because X, Y, and Z personality traits. They're not going to say like, oh yeah, this person is going to be a great fit for, the front facing job when they don't want to talk to people and all they ever want to do is just sit on their computer and do data entry. Like they're not gonna put you in that position. It's good to recognize in yourself the different things that you're willing to do, I think. And for me, like I will probably never apply for a job that I don't want to do, right? Like if I don't see myself doing a job, I don't think I'll ever apply for it. And I think it's because I don't want to waste their time and I don't want to waste my time, especially going through an interview process, because it takes so much time to actually do stuff like that and do a hiring packet and doing all that stuff. So kind of, and that's kind of another thing to think about when you're applying for jobs is to say like, is this something that I see myself doing? Is this something that I think I would be a good fit at? Because you can, have all the skills in the world, but if it's not something that you're going to be happy doing, then why waste your own time doing it?
And another important thing too that I never even realized until prepping for this one was it's equally them interviewing you as it is you interviewing them. They've ran through the checks, maybe gotten you through the first round of interviews, determined, okay, you're qualified, we'd like to bring you in. And so, I mean, before I used to think that I was like, oh, I made it to the next step. Like, I hope they choose me. Like, yeah, that is a piece to it. But also, like you said, if I'm more than qualified for the position and they choose me, but if it's to the point where I'm interviewing and this company just doesn't seem like that to me or for me, I've had those types of interviews before where I was like, I don't know if I think I'm qualified and I think I'd be great. But I don't like how this, they talk to you, or I don't like the company as a whole. I don't like the values or whatever it may be. I think it's equally important to pay attention to that, which ties into it has to be something you want to do, but also it's your chance to get to know them, get to know the company. And I think that helps level the playing field a little bit. It's not like, oh, here we're sitting high and mighty on our throne. What are you going to do to prove to us you're worthy, or so to speak, as opposed to, finding out the questions and asking them questions to give yourself an idea of what this job is beyond the description.
And I think like that's an important piece to recognize, is that an interview is a two-way street, to where, like you were saying, like you're there to interview them. I think one of my favorite questions to ask at the end of an interview is, what opportunities do you see in your department currently? Or what opportunities do you see for the company currently? And that will tell you how they personally feel about their own jobs and whether they're bought into their own position that they're trying to even hire for, right? So if a company says like, oh yeah, we don't really have a lot of opportunities, or if they can't think of any, that to me is a huge red flag. Like, I don't want to work for some place where there's not, like, people don't want to work there. Like, what makes them not want to work there? That they're not excited about the opportunities that their department or their company has to offer for people. So I think like another piece of that, like you were saying, is interviewing them. Figure out how they feel about their own jobs that they already have. How does the hiring committee feel about the position that you might be applying for? And really understanding that, like, it's very telling as to how they answer that question of what do you think of your own current position?
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice way to think of things, because then it not only shifts the focus on from you to them, but it also, like you say, gives you a better understanding, and if you can truly fit in that role and in that department or in that company. So now I think kind of how we talked through some of our own experiences and everything, I think it'd be a good time to kind of talk through. We both found some articles that offer some tips and strategies for coping with job interview anxiety, or just how to prepare and prevent and manage it. And so I'm interested to find what similarities and differences there are in each of these articles, and how we both relate with them. So yours had 10, right?
Yeah, so mine has 10.
And which one was yours from again?
Mine is from Psychology Today.
And what's number 1?
Be careful what you eat or drink prior to an interview. And I think that this is a really important thing that people don't often think about. It's probably not good to have caffeine or alcohol before an interview, because mostly just caffeine, but also alcohol. Don't show up drunk to your interview, because that's not a good precedent to set. But for me, like, caffeine makes me really anxious, and it does not help me relax at all. My mind is going a million miles a minute. My heart is beating really fast. It has all of those, like, parasympathetic responses that your body goes through. And
science.
Yeah, science. It's scientifically making me more anxious. And I get really lightheaded because I'm so stressed when I'm drinking coffee. And I can't drink coffee before an interview. It stresses me out to drink coffee normally, so I cannot even imagine how stressed I would be if drinking coffee before an interview.
That was my number 1 as well. Avoid caffeine. And that's exactly what I do now. I used to drink a lot of coffee all day. And
yeah, just pro tip in general, don't drink coffee.
Yep, to reduce anxiety. Fun fact, it has worked a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, like you said, like, caffeine makes you're super jittery, your mind's going a mile a minute, your heart's racing. I'm like that in a normal state.
Mm-hmm.
Without caffeine. So if you add that, that's just an accelerant to disaster. And so yeah, I mean, I already talk a lot. I talk fast and things. So if you just get caffeine in me, I'm just going,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not good. So number 1 for both, no caffeine before. Probably, I'd say 2 hours before at least.
Oh, at least.
Minimum.
Yeah, at the very least. My second one is don't force yourself to calm down. And this is something that I think, I don't know if I 100% agree with that. I think the whole forcing yourself to calm down is the big thing. That keyword being force. Like, you can't force yourself to calm down. Kind of like I was doing before my interview, I started meditating and doing some mindfulness activities. I did the whole, like, put my troubles in a box and throw the box away. And that really helped. That, absolutely helped calm me down. I was trying to take notes before my interview, and I noticed that my hand was shaking because I was nervous. Even though I didn't really feel nervous in, like, the classical sense of being nervous or anxious. Like, I didn't feel nervous, but my hand was shaking. And so I just put my pen down, closed my eyes, imagined myself putting all of my worries in this box, and then I threw the box away. And then, let myself just kind of sit with that peace for a couple minutes after. And then when I opened my eyes and tried to take notes again, my hand was fine. Like, I was totally fine. And so I don't think like you can force yourself to calm down. Like, if you sit there and be like, oh my God, I have to calm down, I have to calm down, I have to calm down, like that just amps you up even further. But if you practice some mindfulness techniques and you do some meditative whatever you need to do that maybe you've already been practicing, I think that can really help you. So don't force yourself, but definitely practicing some mindfulness techniques prior to an interview can absolutely help, I think.
Speaking of mindfulness, tune into episode 6 in case you missed it on how to be mindful when your mind is full.
Ooh, that was such a
See
good
what I did
episode.
there?
Oh, that was such a good episode.
Yeah, my number 2 is visualize success. So this one's kind of cool because you think of interviews, you think of the stress and everything and the pressure that society's placed on interviews, and that you have to do well, because if you don't do well, you're not going to get the job. And so then you start thinking of all these things that could go wrong. What if I mess up this? What if I don't say this? What if they don't like me? And so this idea of visualizing success is kind of reshifting that. And instead of visualizing yourself messing up in the interview or stuttering or whatever it may be, visualize yourself being successful and having that positive outlook on the interview. And I think that is important, and I think it does have an effect. You know, it's your mindset's everything. If you go in, you don't want to be confident, like overconfident and just standoffish and
oh, I'm gonna get this interview and I don't care.
Yeah, you don't want to have that. But if you think of it as like, yeah, I'm gonna do this interview and I'm gonna do really well because I'm a people person, these are people interviewing me, and I'm just gonna treat this as a normal conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And not let your thoughts, well, what if they say this? And then I get caught up or choked up or nervous, this, that, and the other. And so that idea of kind of reshifting your thinking to more successful thoughts, I think that does have a lot of...
It's actually interesting that you say that, because while we were kind of doing some research about this this episode, I found an article from Top Resume that actually talks about how to turn your anxiety around an interview into excitement. And there was a study that was done by a psychologist at Harvard Business School. Her name is Allison Wood Brooks. And she says that before an interview, their participants, they would tell themselves that I'm excited for this interview. I'm getting myself excited, and just saying it out loud and refocusing that energy into excitement instead of anxiety had them do significantly better in their interviews. And they actually put an interesting quote in this article that I found, and it says, "Worry is misspent imagination," which I absolutely love, because that's exactly what it is, right? You're imagining all the things that could go wrong. You're imagining all the different scenarios and all the different outcomes of like, oh, what happens if I'm on this phone interview and my phone dies? What happens if I don't answer this question correctly? Or what happens if I say something stupid during my phone interview? And like, that is just your imagination running wild. You're letting your imagination take control over the situation. Even like things like that happen, right? It could happen, but the chances of it happening are pretty slim, right? The chances of your phone dying, you're always going to charge your phone before a phone interview. Who doesn't? Who doesn't do that? That's crazy, right? You would always be in a situation to where, you know, you could be like, oh, hold on a second, my phone's going to die. Give me a couple moments to plug my phone in, right? How many of us carry phone chargers with us, right?
Fired.
Yeah, like how many of us just like carry phone chargers with us all the time? A lot of people do. It's a very common thing.
I was going to say, is that a rhetorical question? Cause...
No. Like, you know, we're so attached to our phones, you don't let it die, right? I
hate to admit that.
You get so much anxiety when it dies that there's not even like a remote possibility that your phone would be possibly dead before a phone interview, right? And so, like, just refocusing that energy with your anxiety into excitement is kind of what you're talking about. It's like visualize success, refocus it into being excited for this opportunity that you've been given and saying like, I'm going to do really well at this phone interview.
So what's your number 3?
My number 3 is control what you can by preparing for the interview. So like we were talking about before, making sure that, you've done at least a little bit of research about what possible interview questions they could ask you. There's never any harm in Googling the top 10 most common interview questions.
Done that.
Because even if they don't ask you that exact question, you can somehow work your answers of those into your interview. So for example, today, somebody asked me in my interview, what are the top 3 things that you struggle with in your position currently? And for me, I answered that question with some of my weaknesses and how I was improving on those weaknesses, right? So I said, I don't do very well with change. And that is 100% who I am. I hate change. Absolutely hate it. It freaks me out. I don't like to think about things changing. I struggle with it. But when I surround myself with people who do like change, I'm in a better place mentally and physically even to handle that change. So that's how I spun that question. I used my strengths and my weaknesses to say, this is what I'm struggling with currently in my position. And this is how I'm changing that. So just have like a general idea. You're telling your story, and familiarizing yourself with your story is the best way that you could even prepare for an interview. Just reminding yourself of all the things that you're capable of. That's why I go through and I update my resume every 6 months, is because I want to remind myself of like, these are all the things that I've done in the past 6 months. These are all the things that I've done in my entire life. And how do I tell that story?
Yeah, my number 3 is reducing stressors. So this one, it's kind of weird. It says reduce stressors unrelated to your actual performance in the interview. So uncomfortable clothing, getting lost, showing up late. I think those are like some external factors that if they were to happen, that's just going to stress you out even more. Oh, sorry, I was late. Does not look very good. And, if you're wearing some uncomfortable clothing, but it looks good, like at the end of the day, like you don't want to be sitting there like fidgeting and like doing weird things that are not appropriate for an interview setting, and like, that's not going to look good. And so I think, giving yourself plenty of time, like in my instance, like it was during the business day. And so, you have to give yourself enough time to get there, accommodate for traffic. It's supposed to snow that day. So I was like, well, shoot, what if I get trapped in a blizzard? And just thinking of those types of things. And then I got to the parking lot a little early and prepped, and, it worked out fine. So I think that piece definitely has some importance to it. So I like that. And then, my 4th one was do your research. You want to prepare for your interview, which I did. And researching the company and, tailoring those questions that you already have maybe thought of or anything to the actual answers of the interview, which I really like. And
Sorry, I'm throwing my cup around over here.
So what's number 4 for you?
Number 4 for me is write down your spinning thoughts. And I think this is what I was doing prior to my interview today. I didn't realize I was doing it at the time, but I got on my lunch hour, and I started writing things down of all the things that I might want to say in my interview. So I was working on, just refreshing the story in my mind. And that's when I did my meditative thing, but I was writing down the things that I didn't want to forget to say in the interview. And I think it really helped. It helped me focus my thoughts, get rid of some things that didn't necessarily pertain to the job that I was interviewing for, and focus in on the things that I knew that I wanted to say. So it's a very therapeutic experience to write down your thoughts in general. And so before an interview, it can really help you just reduce your anxiety in general around your interview, I think. And then number 5 for me is question your thoughts. So asking yourself, like, is this true? So if you're thinking about like, oh, I'm going to get trapped in a blizzard. My phone's going to die. I'm not going to say the right things in my interview. And you have to ask yourself, like, is this true? Is this a possibility? And then you can accommodate for it. So you just have to kind of anticipate the things that you can change and then accept the things that you can't.
Yeah, so it's kind of like that positive thinking piece that it said earlier. My number 5 is not succumbing to pressure. So like you said, it says it may be tempting to spiral into those negative thoughts and everything. Like, oh, they don't really like me. I'll never get this job. I didn't do so well. I'm not a good fit. Blah, 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 blah. Like, no, like shift that. Have some confidence in yourself. This is a chance for them to interview you and you to interview them. If you don't get the job, it's not because you suck.
Mm-hmm.
It's simply because, maybe you're called for doing something else. Or there's a better opportunity for you down the road that this is aligning you for that, or it's helping you better prepare for that future interview. And so kind of spinning it and making those positive thoughts there. And I do like how you said, or how yours said, to write down those spinning thoughts. I do that when I'm not even in an interview. Like if I'm just sitting there and my mind's spiraling, I'll just write things down. And it does take practice. It's not just I instantly write it down and then boom, it's gone. Like I still thinking, and I'm just like, okay, I've already written those down. I don't need to be, rethinking it, rehashing up some stuff I've already assessed and dealt with and scheduled or whatever it may be. So I really like that piece. Are we going all the way to 10, or should we just do 5 each and then say that we're going to list both of these articles in the description below?
Yeah, let's do that.
Lit.
Yeah.
All right, so those were both 5 tips so mine came from verywellmind.com.
And mine came from Psychology Today.
We'll go ahead and link the articles in the description below. So wherever you're listening, you can click on those links to see the rest of the tips. And yeah, it was kind of fascinating just to see how we both related to those. And now we'll go into our quote. As promised, at the end of every episode, we'd like to send you guys off with a quote that resonated with us in some type of way. And so today's quote, Lindsey and I found very fitting for this topic.
Oh, yeah, especially since we're talking about interviews. So the quote is, "Trust that when the answer is no, there is a better yes down the road." And I think that this is absolutely perfect for the topic of interviews because it can be so disappointing to have somebody say no to you for an interview, which is probably why we're so anxious about it all the time. But I think that things fall into place when they're supposed to. I am a pretty firm believer in the universe will provide for you however it means to in that moment. And so sometimes a no leads to a yes down the road. And so there have been times where I've had people say no to me for jobs. I've had people say no to me for a bunch of different things, but it all works out in the end. And I think that that's what this quote is saying, is that, you got to just wait. Just because one door closes doesn't mean that all the doors are closed. Another window may be open somewhere that you got to find.
Yeah, I like that you say that, in your perspective, it's the universe. And so in mine, I think for me in those situations, like if I don't get this interview, like I know personally, like in my beliefs, like I know God has a plan for me. And so it's fascinating just to see how you interpret it and how I, and so, but out of the way, it's like we mentioned earlier, like it's an opportunity to learn, not necessarily from mistakes, or just learn from this experience and how you can hone in your skills or improve on answering the questions in the interview or improve your professional skills. And the list goes on. And so I think it's super important to not beat yourself up and get upset, and then as impatient as I am, if it's to the point where I were not to get this position, I just see that as a learning experience, knowing that there's something out there for me. And so with that, we do hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. We would love to hear if there's any tips or tricks that you guys have to cope with stress or manage anxiety that comes when preparing for an interview. In addition, if there's any quotes or anything that you guys would like to share with us, episode suggestions, etc., we would love for you to share those with us. DM us on Instagram at FrankDisconnect. We're excited to continue this journey into 2020 with you guys and explore all the wonderful things that we have planned for the podcast this year. Again, be sure to send any questions or suggestions to Ask Frank at frankdisconnect.com. Go ahead and give us a follow on Spotify and iTunes, and hit that little subscribe button if you're tuning in on YouTube.
I always forget that we have a YouTube channel.
It's fascinating. We'd love it if you'd leave us a review as well. This helps us be able to reach more people and help others to hear the podcast. And lastly, don't forget to check out our Patreon at patreon.com/FrankDisconnect. Thanks again for listening. Tune in next time for another episode of The Disconnect.